Did you know there is a do not fear verse for every day of the year? That's right, there are exactly 365 fear not verses in the Bible. Coincidence? There's no such thing. We're racing through the Bible, and this is Philippians and Colossians. Are you ready? Let's go. While Paul was in prison when he wrote this letter to the church at Philippi, he was stable, content, and happy in his faith. He wanted to thank them for their support and regular gifts, but Paul also wanted to encourage these Christians to have the right attitudes towards one another. He was concerned about false teachers and those he had dubbed enemies of the cross. Primarily, though, Paul's goal in this letter was to challenge the Christians to rejoice regardless of the circumstances around them. Paul founded this church, which was the first church founded on European soil, on his second missionary trip. Timothy, Silas, and Luke were with him. This church was composed of Gentile believers who were very responsive to his ministry. And so Paul doesn't need to defend his apostolic authority in this letter or explain important doctrine like he did in some other letters. You can read all about Paul's time in Philippi in Acts chapter 16. While in Philippi, Paul met a businesswoman named Lydia, a seller of purple, and cast out a demon in a slave girl. The demon brought her masters profit, and seeing the profit potential lost, the masters dragged Paul and Silas to the authorities in the marketplace. Paul and Silas were beaten and thrown into prison where they prayed and sang hymns at midnight. God sent an earthquake, and the jailer got baptized. Word came that Paul and Silas were to be freed, but Paul did not want to be released secretly, for they were Romans who were beaten in public. The magistrates were afraid and went to Paul and Silas in person, begging them to leave. They went back to Lydia's house before departing Philippi. The city was a prosperous Roman colony, and the residents prided themselves on being citizens of Rome. They dressed like Romans, often spoke Latin, used Roman coins, and many were retired military who had been given land in the area. There weren't enough Jews for a synagogue, so it's not surprising to find no Old Testament quotations in this letter. Paul wrote from Rome near the end of his first Roman imprisonment, likely around 60 to 62 AD. This is Paul's happiest letter, and the happiness is infectious. Before we've read a dozen lines, we begin to feel the joy ourselves. He punctuates the sentences with happiness that has a way of getting inside of us as we read. Paul doesn't tell us that we can be happy or how to be happy. He simply and unmistakably is happy. None of his circumstances contribute to his joy. He wrote them from a jail cell. His work was under attack by competitors, and after 20 years or so of hard traveling in the service of Jesus, he was tired, and he would have welcomed some relief. But circumstances are incidental compared to the life of Jesus that Paul experiences from the inside. It's a life that not only happened at a certain point in history, but continues to happen, spilling out into the lives of those who receive him. Christ is, among much else, the revelation that God cannot be contained or hoarded. In fact, that spilling out quality of Christ's life, that accounts for the happiness of Christians. 4 major themes emerge in Philippians: gratitude, unity, joy in spite of suffering, and confidence in Christ. While Paul was in Ephesus, a convert named Epaphras, whose name comes from the Greek god Aphrodite, meaning that he was probably into paganism before he became a Christian, he traveled to Colossae and he founded a church there. Paul never traveled to Colossae, but while he was imprisoned in Rome, Epaphras came to see Paul and told Paul that some heresy had developed in the church in Colossae. So Paul wrote his letter to the Colossians because they were under pressure to make some changes in their belief system. Essentially, they kept being asked to add something to Jesus Christ. Some said you need Jesus plus other gods. Some people who still worshiped Greek and Roman gods wanted the Christians in Colossae to be more tolerant of other deities. Others said you need Jesus plus rules and traditions. These people said that faith is not enough. They had a long list of rules, and most of them started with don't. Others were more mysterious, saying, you need Jesus plus secret knowledge. Some people in Colossae were trying to convince the church that they didn't have the full story about Jesus. The secret knowledge was that Jesus was close to God and a lot like God, but he wasn't God himself. And then there were those who wanted to add new experiences to Jesus. Some people said you needed festivals and visions, circumcision and dramatic experiences to really understand fulfillment in Christ. The letter's theme, seen in light of the rising heresy, is the sufficiency of Christ. The city of Colossae was located about 100 miles inland from Ephesus. At one point, it had become a booming city, but by the time Paul wrote his letter to the Christians living there, it was a small town. Colossians can be broken into two main parts, teaching and living. Chapters 1 and 2 tell us that all we ever need is found in Christ alone. Paul does that by explaining who Christ is. And what does Christ in us do? If we believe in the Jesus of Colossians chapter 1 and 2, then we can't keep living like we've always lived. A Christian relates differently to other Christians. They have a new life at home and at work, and they even talk differently.